The problem list on DoctorView is where you'll document the patient's diagnosis and chronic conditions. From the DoctorView menu, navigate to Problem List. Information that's entered here crosses encounters. We already have data here that the patient is a falls risk and has wound packing material. We can see that information here, and that has been entered in a previous encounter. Anything we enter into the problem list will populate into the patient's chart and will appear for all future encounters until it is modified or removed. This visit relates to the diagnosis. By default, if we leave the default as add new as this visit, what we enter into here, into the problem name list, will be the diagnosis. If we click the little arrow next to this visit, you'll see that we can do this visit and chronic if it would be a chronic condition that's also the reason for this admission. And chronic would be if we want to document that they've got a chronic condition, but that's not the reason why they've been admitted. For this first demonstration, I will leave the default as add new as this visit, and I will document a diagnosis. The first step is to enter the diagnosis. The second step is to modify it to document that it is a principal diagnosis. And to do that, we click onto the diagnosis and we click onto modify. Every diagnosis needs to be changed to principal diagnosis unless you're working in the emergency department, in which case you will have working diagnosis. Otherwise, always change to principal and click OK. We've now successfully added in our diagnosis. The patient also tells us that they have diabetes, so let's click on the drop-down arrow. Let's select chronic, as this is a chronic condition, and we can type in diabetes into the search box. If we had not changed the type from this visit to chronic, we would have documented it as a diagnosis. If your filter is set to this visit and you want to enter a chronic condition, it's very easy to accidentally type in a chronic condition as a diagnosis, as I'm going to demonstrate here. I've accidentally documented hypertension as the diagnosis when it was actually a chronic condition that I intended to add. So I can simply come over here to the right and click onto the word chronic. At this stage, it's now documented as this visit, so a diagnosis and a chronic condition. However, if it was documented as a diagnosis by error, we can untick the this visit box, and it removes it as a diagnosis, so we can very easily click between these boxes. In summary, remember that when you've entered in a diagnosis, you will leave the default as this visit. A chronic condition you will change to chronic from the drop-down. Once you've entered in a diagnosis, always remember to click onto the diagnosis, click onto modify, and change the type to principal.